And he looks at his colleague and goes, "What? Are you a sir or a madam?" And I said, "Either way." And the colleague looks at me and goes, "You need to pick one, sir or madam." And in that moment, it hadn't really registered to me that they were trying to decide whether the male or female security agent was going to pat me down, because it was just my ankles, not my area. I didn't think it mattered. I kind of just thought they were telling me that I couldn't be non-binary for some reason, and I just kind of froze. And 3 seconds of silence went by before one of them said, "We're gonna go with madam because you can't make up your mind." Transphobia and misogyny at the airport. Double whammy, girl.
In my day-to-day life, I generally make very little fuss about my sexuality. A lot of people don't even realize that I'm bisexual or a member of the LGBT. And most of the time, it's not relevant. So if it comes up, it comes up. But if not, it's not really a point of particular interest in most day-to-day circumstances. But many of us old school gay, lesbian, bi, trans people, who I refer to as the OG LGBT, we don't feel any connection with the new wave of LGBTQ plus queer identity, and certainly not something that we make a big song and dance about. I'm a Gen Xer. I was born in 1972, so what we and my predecessors fought for was just acceptance, the right to love who we want to love and live how we want to live. It was as simple as that. We weren't after special privileges, which seems to be what many of the new queer generation are seeking. Special treatment. And this video that I'm about to share with you is a great example of that. So check this out.
So I just got kind of hate crimed at Heathrow on my way back to New York from a little holiday in London, which is maybe an appropriate edging of re-entering the United States right now, but let me explain. So I check in, I walk through security, all my bags are going through the scanner, I'm wearing my shoes because you get to wear your shoes now, shout out to that, and my ankles set off the alarms. And I'm okay, sure, I'm wearing my big, mid-calf Bottega boots because I'm fierce like that at the airport. Happens sometimes, not a big deal. I walk through, the guy's come over here, I know he's gonna pat me down. He looks me in the eyes and goes, "Are you a sir or a ma'am?" Now, usually when somebody asks me that question, I look them in the eyes and give them a little shoulder shimmy and go, "I'm whatever you want, honey," because I'm not gonna sit there and explain to you what non-binary is. And I obviously knew in that moment that that's not what I was going to say to this, British TSA agent, I don't know what it's called over here. And I kind of froze up, and then I was "Doesn't matter." And he looks at his colleague and goes, "What? Are you a sir or a madam?" And I said, "Either way." And the colleague looks at me and goes, "You need to pick one, sir or madam." And in that moment, it hadn't really registered to me that they were trying to decide whether the male or female security agent was going to pat me down, because it was just my ankles, not my area. I didn't think it mattered. I kind of just thought they were telling me that I couldn't be non-binary for some reason, and I just kind of froze. And 3 seconds of silence went by before one of them said, "We're gonna go with madam because you can't make up your mind." Transphobia and misogyny at the airport. Double whammy, girl. Really gagged me a bit. And it's funny because on this trip here and in Germany, a lot of people make a commentary "Oh, America, it's pretty scary over there right now." Scary here too, girl. No, I'm not too much better. I forgot to add that after that, they went through every single piece of luggage I owned in depth. And there was nothing bad in there, but I had also just come back from a weekend of clubbing in Berlin, so it was a lot of funny thongs and things that they had to handle. That's on you. But of course, there's a whole audience watching this go down, so 15 people got to see that interaction, and then this poor security agent pulling leather and lace and thigh-high boots out of my luggage. At least they had somebody to talk about on the flight home.
So before I begin my critique of this video, I would like to say that I'm not trying to attack the guy. Maxwell Griffin, what's his name? Griffin Maxwell Brooks. It's not a personal attack because he seems like a cool guy. He seems to have a cool sense of humor, and his attitude seems pretty chill. He's speaking in a very calm tone. And although I don't agree with what he's saying, I don't agree with the overall message of the post, I believe that it's comedy and he's just trying to be funny. I hope so, but I'm not entirely sure. So I want to talk about the subject matter rather than attacking him personally. And I'm also going to address some of the comments, because in the comment section, people seem to take this matter very seriously, even though from where I'm looking, it just looks like comedy. But I'm not entirely sure. What do you think?
I walk through, the guy's like, come over here, and he's gonna pat me down. He looks me in the eyes and goes, are you a sir or a ma'am? Now, usually when somebody asks me that question, I look him in the eyes and give them a little shoulder shimmy and go, I'm whatever you want, honey, because I'm not gonna sit there and explain to you what non-binary is.
So this part of the video was pretty cute, I thought, because he demonstrates that old school gay sass, that attitude we all know and love, which I believe is developed from a lifetime of being bullied, or certainly a childhood of being bullied, where you learn to grow a thick skin and you learn to clap back at people with attitude and humor, because to get upset is to allow others to get the better of us. So a lot of gays develop this kind of comic, sassy attitude that gets us through anything. I'll be anything you want me to be, honey. It's such a great way of turning the tables and giving them that sense of discomfort that they try to give you.
And I kind of froze up, and then I was like, doesn't matter. And he looks at his colleague and goes, what? Are you a sir or a madam? And I said, either way. And the colleague looks at me and goes, you need to pick one, sir or madam. And in that moment, it hadn't really registered to me that they were trying to decide whether the male or female security agent was going to like pat me down, because it was just my ankles, not my like area. I didn't think it mattered. I kind of just thought they were telling me that I couldn't be non-binary for some reason, and I just kind of froze.
It's because they're going to pat him down as he goes through security. And it is quite an intimate experience. It can be. I remember traveling through the US one time, and the man who was doing my pat down, he stood right up close to me here with his head practically on my shoulders. I could hear him breathing, and then he reached his hands behind me and he stuck them under the waistband of my joggers, you know, joggers that have elastic waistband, and under my underpants, and he cupped both my bare cheeks, all while I could hear him breathing over my shoulder. So that was quite intense. If I was a sensitive person, I may have found it kind of an overstep, but I'm not sensitive. And I have to say, he wasn't attractive either, because if he was, it would have been slightly titillating, but it wasn't. It was just nothing. It was slightly, I was a little bit shocked, because I never would have thought they would go as far as to cup your bare cheeks. So a lesson for you to take from that experience: if you're sensitive, don't wear an elastic waistband if you're going to be flying, because it's too easy to do that. So yeah, there is a very legitimate legal reason why they need to know whether a male or female should be doing that sometimes intimate search. And most women would rather a woman do it than a man, for obvious reasons. I would say that perhaps not all men, straight men I'm talking about, would prefer a man to do it. I'm pretty sure a lot of them would prefer a woman to do it. But for the sake of the female officer, it wouldn't be right for her to have to search a man either. It has to be a comfortable and dignified experience for both the traveler and the officer. There are rules that require them to determine whether you are male or female, so they know whether a male or female officer is going to pat you down.
And 3 seconds of silence went by before one of them said, we're gonna go with madam because you can't make up your mind. Transphobia and misogyny at the airport. Double whammy, girl.
So the officer says, let's go with ma'am. And I don't know what else they should have done. If he's not going to be forthcoming with the answer, they have to make an assumption. And he calls it transphobia, but I don't see how it's transphobic if the dude isn't even trans. He's a cisgender male, right? Surely the correct thing to do would be to ask how you identify, male or female. I mean, isn't that the respect that trans people are looking for, rather than assuming. He also calls it misogyny. But again, he's not a woman. So how is it misogynistic? I mean, if anything, the only misogyny in this scenario is the disrespect to the female officer to expect her to pat down a male. But the fact that the dude is dressed like a woman, which presumably he is, which is why this whole issue has arisen, because if he wasn't, they wouldn't have even needed to ask in the first place, right? But he claims that he's non-binary, which means that he doesn't identify as male or female. And that's fine. Nobody is saying that he's not allowed to think that. People can think whatever they want of themselves. But in this situation, we're not talking about gender, we're talking about sex. And surely this is the rhetoric that LGBT activists are always trying to push, that there's a difference between gender and biological sex. And in this instance, what they're asking him is his biological sex, so they know which officer should be potentially touching his privates. So it seems Griffin is the one struggling with these basic concepts. For the purposes of the pat down, there are two sexes, male and female. In his head, there may be many genders, but none of them are relevant in this particular instance. So there seems to be some sort of a disconnect between his own perceived reality as it exists in his head and the objective reality that we're dealing with here in this question. The fact that he is non-binary has no relevance here. I mean, the only way in which they could accommodate him would be if they were to hire non-binary officers. And I'm imagining what this non-binary officer would be like. And I'm thinking about Pat from Saturday Night Live in the 80s. Any other Gen Xers or boomers out there remember Pat? Back in the 80s, Saturday Night Live was nothing like what it is today. It was totally unwoke. There was no such thing as woke in the 80s. The humor that we saw on Saturday Night Live was not politically correct. They made fun of everybody. And that's how it should be, I believe, in comedy. Everyone should be fair game. If there's any group that you cannot make fun of, then that group is clearly privileged. But there was a character called Pat who was basically non-binary, but back then there wasn't a label for these people. Well, there may have been in the scientific, psychological community, but it wasn't a commonly known thing. But these people have always existed. Everyone has always had friends, family, or classmates or colleagues who were sort of gender non-conforming or ambiguous. And this is Pat, the character who, as viewers, we also never knew whether Pat was male or female. So Pat was the original they, them, before there was such a thing as they, them pronouns. And the comedy in every Pat sketch derived from people trying to guess Pat's gender by skirting all around the issue because they didn't want to offend him or her. Because back then, without the gender neutral pronouns, you couldn't ask, so what are your pronouns, or how do you identify? It was something that people didn't talk about back then and didn't know how to address. So they would ask him questions like, for example, he'd be in a barber shop. They would be in a barber shop getting a haircut, and the barber wouldn't be sure what kind of haircut to give Pat. So they'd have to do like discreet kind of detective work, asking very polite questions to try and work it out. Like, do you have a partner? And Pat would be like, my partner's name is Chris. So all of Pat's answers would be gender neutral. So we never could find out what they were. Pat was going to a wedding. So the barber asked, what are you planning to wear to the wedding? So Pat's answer was, I'm going to be wearing a black pantsuit. So basically whatever question you asked Pat, the answer would be ambiguous because it was always gender neutral. So it seems in this video, Griffin is basically being a modern day Pat. Because even though we have all the language and the cultural tools to be able to talk about these things openly and respectfully, he's not complying. He's not willing to give the answer that is needed. And so he's being deliberately obstinate and refusing to play along by the very rules that these people try to enforce upon us. I mean, does he want to take us back to the 80s when we couldn't ask these questions and we had to make assumptions? I thought that was the whole thing that they were fighting against, because he's claiming that this was transphobia. But is he saying that it was transphobic of them to ask or transphobic of them to assume? You can't have it both ways. So clearly, Griffin is deliberately baiting here. He's trans baiting or gender baiting or identity baiting or whatever you want to call it for attention. What Griffin is experiencing is a problem that he's created for himself. And I don't mean by choosing to be non-binary, because there's nothing wrong with that. But the fact that he's not willing to cooperate with them and answer a very simple question that doesn't in any way take away from his identity. It's just to comply with their legal obligation. And it's as if he's using his non-binary identity to create confrontation that wouldn't otherwise be there. It seems the only way for him to not get into this situation would be to skip his search, to give him a special privilege that he can just walk through, unlike everybody else. Anyway, let's have a look at some of the comments. The first one sounds pretty respectful to me. If they'd assumed either way, you'd have complained. But because they gave you the option, you still complain. Hardly a hate crime. Right. They were totally respectful. What else could they have done? And to call it a hate crime, yeah, that is ridiculous, isn't it? Especially considering that there are so many people out there in other parts of the world where homosexuality or any kind of gender deviance is not tolerated. And there are people who are genuinely getting hate crimed, as in verbally and physically assaulted. That's what you call a hate crime. Getting beaten up or called really hateful names. And it seems that a lot of people in Gen Z don't even know what a hate crime is because they've never experienced one. If you can consider this a hate crime, then you clearly have never been at the receiving end of true hate crime, because you would know the difference and you wouldn't abuse the term like that. It diminishes the value of that term. A lot of true victims today are not being heard because everyone's so sick of these terms being so overused. So in response to that comment, Ashton says, well, they aren't either, as in they aren't male or female, so you miss them entire effing point. We know that he's non-binary and in his head he's neither male or female. I think you, Ashton, missed the point that that answer is irrelevant in this situation. They're not asking what you feel in your head. They're asking what are you physically? And then Cancer Man responds to Ashton, except in Britain you are. Non-binary BS is not recognized in UK law. This dude is a dude. You don't get to walk into another country and decide you get to pick how the law applies. Stay in the US. It's true. In Britain, it's not recognized in the law. And I think now, in the US under Trump, you guys are the same now too, right? There's just two genders now, male and female, according to the law. Hallelujah. And that's not to say that non-binary doesn't exist. Yes, it does exist, and nobody's saying that you cannot identify as non-binary. But in scenarios like this one, there is no accommodation for a third sex. Either you're male or female. And that doesn't exclude trans people, because if you're a trans woman who was born biologically male but now identifies female, then you would simply answer female and get patted down by the female officer. And vice versa, if you're a trans male, there is no non-binary pat down. Next comment. protocols should be more inclusive, but it reads as tone deaf for a rich white Ivy League alum to be punching down on working class service workers for following standard procedures. I love that so much. In the world of woke identity politics, you can never win because everyone has an identity, and there's always going to be someone else who can claim one-upmanship on you against your identity. So in this case, he's playing up on his non-binary identity, but he's still a rich, white Ivy League alumnus, singular, alumni plural, yeah. And so he's white privileged, basically. So shut up, you white privileged biatch. That's what they normally say, isn't it? Yeah, you can't win. Once you play woke identity politics, you're going to be engulfed in this perpetual battle against other people who have other identity labels, who they think are more important than yours or more oppressed. And you will be, no matter how oppressed you are, someone else will consider you their oppressor. And then Evan continues, they aren't paid enough to be expected to accommodate exceptions. The real issue is the protocol, and punching at the service worker is misplaced frustration and negligent use of a large platform, to be honest. There's nothing I can add to that. Yes, absolutely agree. And then Unholy Saint 83 comments, that was as inclusive as they could have been, and still not enough. This is how Trump became president. Absolutely, it totally is, isn't it? I think a lot of people voted Trump for no other reason than they were tired of the leftist woke bullshit. And it's not that we have an issue with people trying to be kind and accommodating and do the right thing and respect diversity and all that stuff, because all that is good. It's the way they do it in this hostile, divisive manner that just pits people against each other for really superficial things, fighting over external characteristics that really don't matter. Everybody with any critical thinking or even humanity is just sick of that. Next comment. You were disrupting the process and they were trying to move along quickly and do their job. I don't think it's personal. They're on the clock. Yeah, exactly. All that time that he wasted because of his narcissism. Because that's what it is, isn't it? It's just narcissism demanding all this special treatment and being completely oblivious to the fact that these people have a job to do. They've got to rush everybody through to catch their flights. You probably cause somebody to miss their flight over this. So selfish. Then Hanno, I think it is, who has a LGBT flag by their name, an old school LGBT flag. New procedure. Ask if they have a dick instead of this ridiculous forced binary fake decorum. Right, that's what it boils down to. So perhaps the better question would have been, do you have a penis or a vagina? What is your genitalia? If you're not going to answer, how do you identify? And it's gotten to that point that you gotta make jokes, you gotta laugh, because it's gotten so ridiculous that the only way to not be driven insane by this stuff is to laugh at it, like we used to do. I mean, the fact that we've come full circle now to gaining respect and acceptance, and no longer being the butt of all the jokes, to now once again being the butt of all the jokes because we've asked for it. Well, when I say we, I don't mean we, because I don't have any part in this, and a lot of us OG LGBT don't want any part in this, but the new LGBTQ XYZ, the alphabet mafia, have asked for this. Next comment from Flyboy. You had the opportunity to teach and you didn't. Says a lot. Well, was it an opportunity to teach? What is he supposed to teach? A lesson in the meaning of non-binary, like as if they've never heard of it before? This was not an opportunity to teach. Going through airport security where there are hundreds of fellow passengers trying to catch their flight is not an opportunity to give a far left woke university lesson to the officers. And what is the point of teaching them about your non-binary identity when it has no bearing on whether you have a male or female officer pat you down? I mean, he could have used this opportunity to teach them something, but I suspect it wouldn't be anything that they don't already know, and it doesn't answer their question. It doesn't make their job any easier. But the next commenter, Cosmo, takes great offense to this, and it's another hilarious case of woke against woke. What? It's not someone's responsibility to teach others to not be an a-hole? Why are they being an a-hole? Please explain to me. Again, I thought you guys wanted people not to make assumptions, but to ask for your pronouns or your identity. And that's exactly what they did. They asked very respectfully. What else could they have done? And another one jumps in. Jay says, would you also say that it's black folks' responsibility to use every teaching moment that presents itself to teach white folks not to be racist? I honestly don't see how that has anything to do with this. As I said, you can't win, can you? As long as you take part in this identity game, as long as you subscribe to woke far left ideology, your life will be a perpetual battle of the identities. And those of us who know what time it is can see right through it. We know that this is a deliberate ploy of our true oppressors to keep us fighting amongst ourselves. These people are so occupied with fighting each other over their identities that they're oblivious to all of the bigger things going on in the world that they should be fighting. So our oppressors get away with whatever the hell they want because you don't even know what they're doing, because all of your consciousness is consumed with this totally meaningless nonsense that really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to anybody but yourself and all the other people who have fallen for this divisive ideology. Because the rest of us don't care. We don't care how you choose to identify. Most of us are perfectly happy for you to perceive yourself however you wish. So nobody is stopping you from existing. That's a very popular belief now that's being pushed on the left, that the right doesn't want them to exist. And it's something that they're inflicting on themselves. It's a form of victimhood that they seem to just love to revel in right now. And it's really sad. And I think all of us have a responsibility to those we love, because we can't take on this battle for the whole world, but at least the people in our lives that we care about. We have a responsibility to try and snap them out of this if we see them falling into this trap. I believe that all of this divisive woke identity politics is one big psyop. It stops you from seeing what is truly going on in the world. It focuses all your attention on the wrong things, and it stops you from connecting with other humans and with your own spirit. Because when so much of your consciousness is focused on superficial identity labels and immutable characteristics, many of which you cannot change, and some of which, even worse, you voluntarily choose just to oppress yourself so that you have an oppression score in this game of oppression Olympics. It's something that those of us who can see through it, I feel, have a duty to challenge, where it affects the people we care about most. But if it doesn't affect you, if nobody near or dear to you has succumbed to it, then you have the luxury of just completely ignoring it and just getting on with your life, as so many of us who are not chronically online do. because none of this stuff matters at all. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and let me know your thoughts. Do you agree with my assessment of the situation, or do you think there's something else that they could have done differently? I'm always open to hearing your opinions, whether you agree or disagree with me. So do let me have them. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to my channel. And if you enjoyed this video, do give this one a watch too. Thank you so much, and have a great day or evening